Hi there. Hope you had a good Easter. You just need to look at that for just a minute before it sinks in. That's a pretty good one. So we're gonna slow down for the next few weeks because really we don't have a whole lot of material left because your EOC test would have been like in 3 weeks. So anyway, this week we're just going to hit one basic topic, and that is population size and how it slows down and increases. And so here we go. So just a few practice ones right here. Low clouds reflect more sunlight than the open ocean. How would an increase in low clouds most likely affect polar bears? Okay, well, increase in low clouds reflecting sunlight, I think you would have to come to the conclusion that that's going to make it colder. So you wouldn't predict that sea ice would decrease, so we can knock both of these answers out. Sea ice would most likely increase. What would that cause to happen? Well, more sea ice gives the bears more area to hunt. That makes sense. But you're assuming there that they hunt on that sea ice as opposed to in the water, right? Amount of sea ice would increase, making it harder for the bears to find mates. That also makes a little bit of sense because maybe their mates blend into that sea ice. Obviously, they're white fur. But also, if you have more sea ice, the mates would be more spread out. I don't know which answer I'd pick, but I'd probably pick this one. But it's another example of a question that I could find a better way to word. Here's another practice one, right? We have biodiversity now. We've said that. We're going to say it a lot again in the next couple units. This refers to the different kinds, meaning species of organisms living in an ecosystem. Which of the following is least likely to reduce? That means most likely to at least maintain biodiversity. Well, if you clear some forest, assuming there's a whole lot of different kinds of plants in that forest, to grow just a few kinds, assuming a few kinds of crops, that is quite likely to reduce the biodiversity. So we'll knock that answer out, right? Heavy rains cause major flooding, destroying many trees and homes. That sounds like it's going to reduce, not likely to reduce, okay? Shortage of usual food, birds switch to a different food source. Well, that means they have less food, so they're eating a different kind of food. We go back to food webs. That means something else that's probably eating that different food now has less to eat, so their numbers might go down, right? The food source is living stuff. Their numbers might go down, so that's not least likely to reduce biodiversity. You reduce unwanted pet snakes. Here's the introduced invasive species stories, right? The pet snakes like South Florida, pythons, from a foreign country into the wild. The assumption here is now they start to eat a whole bunch of things. That sounds like it would reduce the biodiversity. So what's the answer here, right? Well, I think this would probably be it because it didn't say it destroyed all these kind of trees. And again, biodiversity is not about how many organisms you have, it's how many different kinds. And if you didn't completely wipe out a certain kind of tree, then you still have that certain kind of tree. This one also, I don't know about either of these two answers I could justify. Not another great question. Okay, so here we have again the non-native, sometimes called invasive species, sometimes introduced species. It didn't used to be here, but it got introduced in here, like the pythons in South Florida. How might this harm native species? Usually they're going to eat native species, right? Right? So an increase in predation. Predation of what? Of those pythons on the native species, right? But if they're eating like rats and the rats are eating roaches, then we have a decrease in the predation of rats. So again, there's different ways to look at these answers. We don't want to overthink too much though, okay? Might result in an increase in available prey. Well, one of the parts of this non-native story is these things usually don't have very many natural predators. So we put them into the ecosystem. We don't call them normally prey. So we would knock this answer out. A decrease in predation, don't think that's a good answer either. Decrease in pathogens, disease causers. This description really doesn't make any connection with disease causers. I would pick this one here. That one's a little easier to pick the best answer. This one's very easy, right? This is a definition. The number of individuals of a species, of a group, of a population that a particular ecosystem can support. While biotic potential might sound like a decent answer, right? This is just the definition of carrying capacity. So, which of the following is abiotic? This is also pretty easy also. Kind of though, right? Parasites are living things, so they're not abiotic. Predators are living things, they're not abiotic. But pathogens, I already said, can be abiotic, like smoke, right? But your typical pathogen is like a bacteria, definitely living. A virus, not quite so living, but giving the choices here, soil nutrients is probably your best choice. Except if you overthink it. What's included in soil nutrients is organic molecules, right? What did we call that before? Detritus, right? Dead stuff, right? Detritus then would count as organic, but these aren't the soil nutrients they're most likely talking about here. So if we avoid overthinking, we're going to pick that answer. Okay, so climate in southern Florida changed so that it's hot and dry year round, very little rain. This sounds like a desert, right? Which of the following would most likely occur? Plants usually found in deserts would begin to grow in the area. Well, first they got to get there, but it sounds reasonable that that might happen, right? These extreme environments would not likely increase the plant diversity in the area. It would decrease it, so that's an easy one to go out. Animals would find ways to adapt. They may very well adapt, but the definition of adaptation in an evolutionary sense is you got to have some mutations happen that happen to be helpful and yada yada. So find ways to adapt makes it sound like they're doing it on purpose, and so that's a weakness of that answer, even though it likely would happen that you would see some adaptations evolve. Um, Animals in the area would begin seasonal migrations to get out of the heat and the dryness, except they said this is year round. So seasonal and year round don't go together. So we can knock out A and D pretty easily. This is a weakness of B, and so I would definitely choose C here. Okay, so last one here, corals live near the surface, warm, near the surface and warm. They provide a home for algae, those protists that do photosynthesis. They're producers, they produce food used by corals, which is a biotic factor. Temperature is not biotic, salt is not biotic, right? Sunlight is not biotic, so this is definitely the easiest one of the bunch. Speaking of lunch, it's about lunchtime here. Did you hear about the llama who went on a trip? Well, he called his brother Carl, who's also a llama, and said, "Hey, Carl, let's go down to the park and just hang out for a while." Carl said, "Great, that sounds like great. I want to get out of the house, but listen, don't worry about food. I'll pack a lunch." See, alpaca and llama, they kind of go together. They're like related, which means like common ancestor. And okay, now it's really time to go to lunch. Bye. Hope you enjoyed that.